The December wind cut through Manhattan like a knife. But inside Le Bernardin, one of New York's most exclusive restaurants, the atmosphere was warm and golden. Crystal chandeliers cast soft light over tables dressed in pristine white linens, and the quiet murmur of wealthy diners created a symphony of privilege. Elena Vasquez tied her black server's apron a little tighter around her waist and checked her reflection in the polished silver of the service station. 24 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a neat bun and tired eyes that she tried to brighten with a professional smile. This was her third double shift this week, but the tips at Le Bernardin could cover her mother's medication for a month if she was lucky. "Table 7 is arriving," whispered James, the head waiter, appearing at her elbow. "Private party, very important. The owner himself called about this one." Elena nodded and straightened her shoulders. Important guests were nothing new here. She'd served senators, movie stars, and business moguls. They all wanted the same thing: perfect service that was invisible until needed. The doors opened, and in walked a group that seemed to pull all the energy in the room toward them. At the center was Richard Thornton, the tech billionaire whose face graced magazine covers and whose apps were on every phone in America. 42 years old, with salt and pepper hair styled to perfection, and a suit that probably cost more than Elena made in a year. His laugh was loud, confident, the laugh of a man who'd never been told no. 8 guests followed him, all wearing the same expression of people who knew they were special just by being in his orbit. They were here for a private celebration. Thornton's company had just gone public at a valuation of $12 billion. Elena approached with water glasses on her tray, steady as always. She'd done this 1,000 times. Pour from the right. Serve from the left. Never let the glass touch the table while pouring. Simple rules that became second nature. "Good evening, Mr. Thornton," she said softly. "Welcome to Le Bernardin. I'm Elena, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." Thornton barely glanced at her. He was mid-story, gesturing wildly with his hands, describing how he'd fired an entire development team for missing a deadline. His guests laughed like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. Elena began pouring water, moving silently around the table. She was halfway through when Thornton suddenly threw his arm out to make a point about crushing the competition. His hand hit the wine bottle on Elena's tray. Time seemed to slow as the bottle tipped. The 1982 Chateau Margaux, worth $3,000, tumbled through the air. Dark red wine exploded across Thornton's chest like blood from a wound, spreading across his pristine white shirt and pooling in his lap. The restaurant fell silent. Every head turned. Every conversation stopped. Elena's heart dropped to her stomach. "Oh my God, Mr. Thornton, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." She grabbed napkins, her hands shaking, trying to help clean the mess. Thornton stood slowly, wine dripping from his jacket. His face had turned an ugly shade of red that had nothing to do with the wine. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" His voice was quiet, which somehow made it more terrifying. "It was an accident, sir. Please let me. This suit is worth $50,000. He said each word carefully like he was explaining something to a child. $50,000. That's probably more than you make in 2 years. Elena's manager, Philippe, materialized from nowhere, his face pale. "Mr. Thornton, please accept our deepest apologies. We'll cover all cleaning costs, of course, and your meal tonight is complimentary." "Cleaning?" Thornton laughed, but there was no humor in it. "This suit is ruined, destroyed, by your incompetent waitress." "I'm truly sorry," Elena said again, fighting back tears. She needed this job. Her mother's care facility payment was due next week. "Please, if there's anything I can do." Thornton's eyes suddenly lit up with something cruel. He'd noticed the old piano in the corner of the restaurant, a beautiful Steinway that was mostly decoration, sometimes played by hired musicians during special events. "Anything?" He smiled, and it was the smile of a shark. "You want to make this right?" "Play us some music," Elena blinked. I don't understand." "The piano. Play it. Entertain us. That's what you do here, right? Provide entertainment for your betters?" Philippe shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Thornton, Elena is a server, not a... Then she should have been more careful. With that bottle. Thornton's voice hardened. Unless you want me to call my friend at the Times, tell him about the disaster at Le Bernardin, how the staff assaults customers. The threat hung in the air. A bad review from the New York Times could destroy a restaurant, even one as established as this. Philippe's shoulders sagged. He looked at Elena with apology in his eyes. Perhaps just a song or two? Elena felt like the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. I don't really play. I had a few lessons as a child, but... Perfect, Thornton said, sitting back down, in his wine-stained suit. This should be amusing. Go on, waitress, play us something, earn your forgiveness. The walk to the piano felt like a mile. Elena's legs were shaking. She could feel every eye in the restaurant on her. Some guests looked sympathetic, others curious, but Thornton's table was already laughing. She sat down at the piano bench, and her hands looked small and lost on the keys. The Steinway was magnificent, perfectly tuned, nothing like the broken upright piano hidden under a sheet in her apartment, the one that hadn't been played in 2 years. We're waiting, Thornton called out. One of his guests, a woman in diamonds, giggled behind her hand. Elena placed her fingers on the keys. They were cool and smooth. For just a moment, muscle memory tried to take over, tried to position her hands the way they'd been trained. But she pushed that down, deep down where she'd buried everything else from before. Instead, she played a simple C scale, slowly, clumsily, like a child at their first lesson. Her finger slipped, hitting a wrong note. The sound was jarring in the elegant space. Oh, this is precious, someone at Thornton's table said. She really can't play. Elena started picking out Mary Had a Little Lamb with one finger, the way she'd seen children do. Each note was separate, disconnected, painful to hear. Play something real, Thornton demanded. Something sophisticated. We're Harvard Business School alumni, not kindergartners. Elena fumbled through the opening of Chopsticks, playing it badly, missing notes, losing rhythm. Her face burned with humiliation. She could hear the laughter getting louder, could hear phones coming out, the click of cameras. Are you recording this? Thornton asked one of his friends. This is incredible. When I tell people about the worst service in New York. At a corner table, an elderly woman set down her fork. Miriam Goldstein, 81 years old with silver hair and keen eyes, had been coming to this restaurant for 30 years. She'd seen a lot in her time on the Metropolitan Opera Board, but this was cruelty for sport. Elena tried to transition into Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, but her hands were shaking so badly now that she could barely hit the right keys. Tears were building behind her eyes, but she wouldn't let them fall. Not here, not in front of them. 2 hours, Thornton announced to his table. She plays for 2 hours, or I make sure everyone in New York knows about the disaster at Le Bernardin. Philippe started to protest, but Thornton held up his phone, already typing what looked like a social media post. Elena's hands fell still on the keys for a moment. 2 hours. 2 hours of humiliation. But her mother needed those medications. The care, facility needed to be paid. She didn't have a choice. She started playing again. Simple scales, children's songs, anything she could manage with clumsy fingers that supposedly didn't know any better. The restaurant tried to return to normal, but everyone kept glancing over, witnessing her shame. And in the corner, Miriam Goldstein watched the young woman's posture, the way she held her shoulders, the way her fingers wanted to move versus how she forced them to stumble. Something wasn't right here. Something about this girl was familiar, like a melody you couldn't quite place. The evening wore on, and Elena played her terrible, simple songs while Richard Thornton and his guests laughed and mocked and recorded, never knowing they were documenting what would become their own downfall. 30 minutes had passed, and Elena's fingers were already getting stiff. She'd been playing the same 5 children's songs over and over, deliberately hitting wrong notes, keeping her tempo uneven like someone who'd barely touched a piano before. The sound was painful, but not as painful as the laughter from Richard. Thornton's table. Play Beethoven, shouted one of his guests, a man with a red face who'd had too much replacement wine. Let's see the waitress try Moonlight Sonata. Elena shook her head slightly, keeping her eyes down. I don't know that one, sir. I only know simple songs. Of course you don't, Thornton said, loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. People like you don't appreciate real culture. That's why you serve it instead of living it. The words cut deep. But Elena kept playing her clumsy version of Row, Row, Row Your Boat. What Thornton didn't know was that she could play Moonlight Sonata in her sleep. She'd performed it at Lincoln Center when she was 16, back when her mother was healthy and proud and sitting in the front row with tears of joy in her eyes. Philippe appeared at Elena's shoulder with a glass of water. Just hold on, he whispered. I'm trying to reach the owner, trying to fix this. It's okay, Elena whispered back, though nothing about this was okay. I need this job, Philippe. He squeezed her shoulder gently and walked away, but not before shooting a disgusted look at Thornton's table. The elderly woman in the corner, Miriam Goldstein, had stopped eating entirely. She was watching Elena with intense focus, her head tilted slightly like she was listening for something beneath the terrible playing. Miriam had spent 50 years in classical music. She'd discovered some of the greatest pianists of the generation. And something about this young woman's hands bothered her. It was the way Elena held her wrists. Perfect position, even while playing badly. The way her back stayed straight, her shoulders relaxed. These were things that took years of proper training to develop muscle memory that didn't just disappear. Hey, waitress, Thornton called out again. He'd been getting louder with each drink. Play something romantic. I want to dance with my date. The woman next to him, young enough to be his daughter, laughed nervously. Richard, stop. This is getting mean. It's hilarious, he corrected her. When else will we see something this pathetic? Look at her, pretending she can make music. It's like watching a dog try to paint. Elena's hands froze for just a second. A dog. He'd compared her to a dog. She forced herself to start playing again, a mangled version of London Bridge is Falling, down. Another guest at Thornton's table, a woman with harsh features and designer everything, stood up with her phone. I'm live streaming this, she announced. My followers are going to die. Billionaire makes waitress pay for her mistake. It's already got 5,000 viewers. Elena felt sick. Her humiliation was being broadcast to strangers, people who would laugh at her without even knowing her name or her story, or why she was enduring this torture. Tell them to send requests, Thornton said, delighted by the idea. Let's see what else she can fail at playing. The woman read from her phone. Someone wants to hear jazz. Another person is asking for Mozart. Oh, this one's funny. Someone said play Flight of the Bumblebee. The table erupted in laughter. Flight of the Bumblebee was one of the most technically difficult pieces in classical music, impossible for even skilled pianists without serious practice. Elena kept her head down and continued her simple broken melodies. Her mother used to play Flight of the Bumblebee as a warm-up exercise. Elena had learned it when she was 14, spending months perfecting every rapid note. Her fingers itched to fly across the keys the way they'd been trained to, but she pressed them down slowly, clumsily, playing hot cross buns instead. An hour had passed now. Other diners were starting to leave, unable to enjoy their expensive meals with the horrible piano playing and cruel laughter in the background. Several people complained to Philippe, but what could he do? Thornton's threat hung over everything. This is getting boring, one of Thornton's friends complained. She's just playing the same baby songs. You're right, Thornton agreed. He stood up and walked over to the piano, standing too close to Elena, reeking of wine and expensive cologne. Let's make this more interesting. For every song you play properly, and I mean actually play, not this kindergarten nonsense, I'll donate $1,000 to charity. But if you can't play anything real, you admit you're worthless and apologize to everyone here for ruining their evening. Elena looked up at him for the first time in an hour. His eyes were cold, enjoying her pain like it was entertainment specifically designed for him. I told you, she said quietly. I don't really know how to play. Then apologize. Get on that microphone and tell everyone you're sorry for being incompetent. The restaurant had gone quiet again. Even the kitchen staff were peering out through the service windows. Everyone was watching this cruel game. Miriam Goldstein had seen enough. She stood up, her movement graceful despite her age, and walked toward the piano. She'd recognized something in this young woman's suffering, a dignity that reminded her of someone she'd known years ago. "Excuse me?" Miriam said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Young lady, what's your name?" "Elena," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Elena what?" "Vasquez." Miriam's eyes widened slightly. "Vasquez. Could it be?" She looked closer at the young woman's face, searching for familiar features. "Your mother wouldn't happen to be Maria Vasquez, would she?" Elena went rigid. Nobody had mentioned her mother's name in public in 2 years. "How do you know my mother?" "Maria Vasquez was one of the most brilliant pianists I ever had the privilege of working with," Miriam announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "She performed with the New York Philharmonic. She was magnificent." Thornton laughed dismissively. "Sure she was, and I'm sure the waitress here is secretly a princess too. Nice try, old lady, but I'm Miriam Goldstein," she interrupted, her voice sharp with authority. "Former board member of the Metropolitan Opera. I think I know classical musicians when I meet them. And you, Mr. Thornton, are harassing the daughter of a legendary artist." The live stream comments were going crazy. People were Googling Maria Vasquez, finding old recordings, connecting dots. But Thornton was too drunk on power and wine to care. "If she's the daughter of some famous pianist, then she should be able to play," he said. "Unless talent skips a generation. Is that what happened, Waitress? Mommy was special, but you're just ordinary?" Elena's hands clenched into fists. He could humiliate her, mock her job, treat her like entertainment. But talking about her mother who couldn't even remember her own name most days, her mother who had given Elena everything, taught her everything, and now needed constant care that cost more than most people's mortgages. "One real song," Thornton demanded, going back to his seat. "Play one real song, or admit you're nothing but a disappointment to your mother's legacy." Miriam leaned down to whisper in Elena's ear. "I know who you are. I remember you. You won the Young Artist competition when you were 15. You played at my gala when you were 17. I know why you disappeared, dear. I know about your mother's illness." Elena's eyes filled with tears. Someone remembered. Someone knew she had been more than this. "Play for her," Miriam whispered. "Not for him. For Maria. Show them who you really are." Elena looked at the keys through blurry vision. For 2 years she'd hidden her gift, buried it with everything else she'd lost when her mother's mind started slipping away. Playing felt like betrayal when her mother couldn't even remember teaching her. "We're waiting," Thornton called out, his voice full of mockery. "Show us this legendary talent you inherited." The live stream viewer count had hit 50,000. The restaurant was silent except for the soft clink of glasses being set down. Everyone was watching, waiting to see if the waitress would break completely or somehow prove them all wrong. Elena took a deep breath and straightened her back. Her hands hovered over the keys, and for the first time all evening, they weren't shaking. Elena's hands stayed frozen above the keys. 50,000 people were watching online. The entire restaurant was holding its breath. And all she could think about was her mother's voice, years ago, teaching her that music was never about showing off. "Music is truth," her mother had said, guiding Elena's small hands across the keys. "When you play, you tell the world who you really are." But who was she now? A waitress who cleaned up after rich people? A daughter watching her brilliant mother forget everything, including her own daughter's face? Or was she still, somewhere deep inside, the girl who had made audiences cry with the beauty of her playing? Richard Thornton's voice cut through her thoughts. "Look at her freezing up. She can't do it. All that talk about her famous mother, and she's just another nobody trying to seem special." His girlfriend tugged at his sleeve. "Richard, enough. This is cruel." "It's reality," he said, shrugging her off. "People need to know their place." Those words, "know your place," made something snap inside Elena. She thought about this morning, feeding her mother breakfast, watching her struggle to hold a spoon. Her mother, who once played for presidents and royalty, who could make a piano sing like it had a soul, now couldn't even remember that she had a daughter. Elena had given up everything for her mother. Juilliard had begged her to stay, offering to defer her scholarship, but she couldn't. The early onset Alzheimer's had come fast and harsh when her mother was only 51. Elena was 19, in her second year at the most prestigious music school in the world when she made the choice. No career was worth more than taking care of the woman who had given her everything. "I'm getting bored," Thornton announced. "Philippe, can we get our check? I think we've proven our point about your staff's incompetence." Miriam Goldstein spoke up again, her voice clear and strong. "Mr. Thornton, you said you'd donate $1,000 to charity if she played one real song. Are you going back on your word? She can't play a real song, look at her." "Double it," Miriam said suddenly. $2,000, and I'll match it." Thornton laughed. "You want to throw away your money, old lady? Fine. $10,000 says she can't play anything worth listening to." "20,000, Miriam countered, "to the charity of Elena's choice." The livestream comments were exploding. Someone had found an old YouTube video, Elena at 15 playing at a competition, but the quality was poor, and her face was hard to see. People were debating whether it was really the same person. Elena thought about the bills stacked on her kitchen table. Her mother's care facility cost $8,000 a month. The medications were another $2,000. She worked 3 jobs and still barely made ends meet. $20,000 would mean she could breathe for 2 months, could maybe even take a day off to sit with her mother. "Well," Thornton said, "we're all waiting for this magical performance." Elena looked at Miriam, who nodded encouragingly. Then she looked at the keys. For 2 years, she'd locked this part of herself away. Playing, without her mother, felt like betrayal. Her mother had been her teacher, her inspiration, her everything. How could she make music when the person who taught her what music meant couldn't even remember what a piano was? But then she remembered something else her mother had said during one of her last clear days before the fog completely took over. They'd been sitting in the care facility's common room, and someone had been playing piano badly on the old upright in the corner. "Promise me." Her mother had grabbed Elena's hand with surprising strength. "Promise me you won't stop playing because of me. Music isn't just what I taught you, it's who you are." Elena had promised, but she'd broken that promise the very next day. It hurt too much. Every note reminded her of what she'd lost. Now, sitting in front of this beautiful Steinway, with cruel people laughing at her and kind people hoping for her, Elena made a decision. She wouldn't play for Thornton or his money. She wouldn't play for the viewers online or the diners watching. She would play for her mother, wherever her mind was wandering tonight. She pulled out her phone and sent a quick text to Angela, the night nurse at the care facility. "Is she awake? Can you put the phone near her ear in 5 minutes?" Angela texted back immediately. "She's having a good evening, sitting by the window. I'll have the phone ready." Elena set her phone on the piano, ready to call. Then she looked at Thornton one more time. "The money goes to the Alzheimer's Research Foundation," she said, her voice steady for the first time all evening. "Whatever makes you feel better about failing," he replied. Elena closed her eyes and let her hands find their proper position on the keys. The muscle memory was instant, like coming home after a long trip. She could feel the weight of the keys, the potential energy waiting to be released. In her mind, she was 7 years old again, and her mother was standing behind her, hands on her shoulders. "Feel the music before you play it, mija. Let it fill you up until you have no choice but to let it out." The restaurant seemed to fade away. The laughter from Thornton's table became distant. Even the live stream didn't matter. There was just Elena, the piano, and the ghost of her mother's presence. She thought about which piece to play. It couldn't be just any piece. It had to be something that would say everything she couldn't put into words. Something that would show them not just that she could play, but why she had hidden it. Something that would honor her mother's memory, while proving that Elena was more than they could ever imagine. And then she knew. Of course she knew. There was only one piece that could tell this story. When Elena was 17, her mother had written a composition just for her. It was called Letters to My Daughter, and it was the last piece her mother had ever written before the illness began to show its first signs. It was complex, emotional, technically demanding. It moved from joy to sorrow to hope to loss, and back to joy again. It was a mother's love translated into music. Only 3 people had ever heard it: Elena, her mother, and the composition professor who had called it a masterwork of modern classical music. Her mother had refused to publish it, saying it was just for them, their secret song. But secrets were heavy, and Elena was tired of carrying them. She dialed the care facility and put it on speaker, placing the phone where she could see Angela's confirmation that her mother was listening. Then she looked at Miriam, who was recording everything on her phone with a small, knowing smile. "This piece," Elena said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "was written by Maria Vasquez 2 years before she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. She wrote it for her daughter. She called it Letters to My Daughter. She never published it. No one here has ever heard it before." Thornton started to make another snide comment, but his girlfriend put her hand over his mouth. Even she could feel that something important was about to happen. Elena took one more breath, said a silent prayer to wherever her mother's mind was wandering, and placed her fingers on the keys. The first note rang out clear and true, so different from the clumsy noise she'd been making for the past 2 hours that several people gasped. The second note followed, then the third, and then Elena wasn't thinking anymore. She was just playing, the way she'd been born to play, the way her mother had taught her to play, the way she'd thought she'd never play again. The music began to fill the restaurant, and for the first time all evening, Richard Thornton had nothing to say. The first notes of Letters to My Daughter floated through the restaurant like a memory coming to life. Elena's fingers moved across the keys with the grace of a ballet dancer, each note precisely placed yet flowing naturally into the next. The contrast to her earlier clumsy playing was so stark that several people gasped out loud. The piece began gently, like a mother singing a lullaby. Elena's left hand created a soft, rocking rhythm, while her right hand carried a melody so tender, it seemed to reach into your chest and squeeze your heart. This was the beginning of the story, a mother's joy at holding her daughter for the first time. Richard Thornton's smirk began to fade. He sat forward in his chair, wine stains forgotten, his mouth slightly open. The woman who'd been live streaming lowered her phone, too mesmerized to worry about getting the right angle. As Elena played, she remembered her mother teaching her this opening section. "This is the sound of promise," her mother had said. "Every mother makes promises to her baby, to protect them, to love them, to give them the world. This is that promise in music." The melody began to grow more complex. Elena's fingers danced across the octaves, creating layers of sound that shouldn't have been possible with just 2 hands. The piano seemed to become an entire orchestra under her touch. Several professional musicians in the audience recognized the technical difficulty of what she was doing. Parallel fourths in the left hand, while the right hand played a counter melody in a different time signature. It was the kind of thing that took years to master. The livestream comments were going insane. The viewer count had jumped to over 200,000. Someone had found Elena's old Juilliard acceptance letter posted on the school's website. Another person had discovered a review from when she was 16 that called her the future of American classical piano. But Elena knew none of this. She was lost in the music, in the story her mother had written for her. The piece was moving into its second movement now. The challenges of raising a child, the sleepless nights, the worries, the small failures and tiny victories. The music became more turbulent, with moments of discord that resolved into harmony, like arguments that end in hugs. Philippe, the manager, stood frozen by the kitchen door. He'd known Elena for 2 years, had seen her work doubles and triples, without complaint had watched her smile through the worst customer behavior, but he'd never suspected this. Tears were running down his face and he didn't bother to wipe them away. The third movement was pure joy. A child's first steps, first words, first day of school. Elena's hands flew across the keys in a passage of such speed and complexity that it looked impossible. The notes cascaded like laughter, like a child running through a field of flowers. This was the part her mother had always played with such happiness, even in the early days of her illness when she could remember nothing else. Miriam Goldstein was openly weeping now. She recognized genius when she heard it, but this was more than genius. This was love transformed into sound, grief transformed into beauty. She held her phone steady, making sure to capture every second. The world needed to see this. Thornton tried to speak, to make some comment to save face, but his girlfriend grabbed his arm. "Shut up," she whispered fiercely. "Just shut up and listen." The fourth movement began to darken. This was the fear every parent carries. That something will happen to their child. That they won't always be there to protect them. The bass notes grew ominous, while the treble cried out in worry. Elena played this part with her whole body, swaying with the emotional weight of it. She knew now that her mother had been writing about her own future, somehow sensing that her brilliant mind would soon begin to fade. At the care facility, Angela the nurse held the phone close to Maria Vasquez's ear. The elderly woman, who hadn't spoken a coherent sentence in months, suddenly whispered, "Elena?" A tear rolled down her cheek, though she couldn't have said why she was crying. The music built to a crescendo that made the chandelier crystals tremble. Elena's hands were a blur, the notes coming so fast and fierce that they seemed to merge into a wall of sound. This was the storm, the worst fear realized, the diagnosis that changed everything. Several people in the restaurant were openly sobbing now, though they didn't fully understand why. Then suddenly silence. Elena let it hang in the air for 3 heartbeats. The entire restaurant held its breath. When she began the final movement, it was with such gentleness that it felt like an embrace. This was acceptance, but more than that. It was a celebration of what had been, rather than a mourning of what was lost. The melody from the beginning returned, but richer now, fuller, carrying all the experiences of the movements before. It was saying, our time together was worth everything. Love doesn't end when memory fades. Elena's tears were falling freely now, dropping onto the keys, but her hands never faltered. She played the final passage with everything she had, pouring 2 years of suppressed grief and love and talent into each note. The music seemed to expand beyond the restaurant, beyond the moment, touching something eternal. The last note rang out, sustained by the pedal, fading slowly into silence. Elena kept her hands on the keys, her head bowed, unable to move. The restaurant was completely still. Even the kitchen had stopped working. No one wanted to be the first to break the spell. Then, from the corner, Miriam Goldstein began to clap. Slowly, deliberately, the way you applaud something that has changed you. Others joined her one by one until the entire restaurant was on its feet. The applause wasn't polite or obligatory. It was thunderous, overwhelming, the kind that comes from witnessing something extraordinary. The woman with the phone was crying too hard to speak, but she managed to type to her viewers. "I've seen something incredible tonight. This woman just played her soul." Richard Thornton sat in his chair, not applauding, his face pale and shocked. He looked like someone who had just realized they'd been standing next to a masterpiece and hadn't known. Worse, he'd tried to destroy it for fun. Elena finally lifted her head and looked around, seeming surprised to find herself in the restaurant. For a few minutes, she'd been somewhere else entirely, in the past, with her healthy mother, in a place where music could fix everything. Her phone was still on speaker and she could hear Angela's voice. "Elena, I don't know what you did, but your mother just said your name. She's smiling. She knows it's you playing." That broke Elena completely. She covered her face with her hands and sobbed. 2 years of held-back tears, 2 years of silent grief, 2 years of pretending to be nobody when she had once been somebody. The applause grew even louder, mixed with cheers and whistles. Miriam, walked over and put her arms around Elena, holding her like a grandmother would. "That was the most beautiful thing I've heard in 40 years, she whispered. "Your mother would be so proud." The live stream had reached 500,000 viewers. The video was already being shared across every social media platform. Waitress reveals hidden genius was trending worldwide. People were calling it the performance of the decade. But in that moment, Elena didn't care about any of that. All that mattered was that her mother had heard her play again, had remembered her name, had smiled. For just a few minutes, the music had built a bridge across the fog of Alzheimer's, and mother and daughter had found each other again. When Elena finally stood up from the piano bench, she faced Thornton for the first time since she'd started playing. He couldn't meet her eyes. The applause seemed to go on forever. Elena stood by the piano, wiping her eyes, still trembling from the emotional weight of what had just happened. The restaurant had transformed from a place of humiliation into something that felt almost sacred. Even the waitstaff had come out, from the kitchen, many of them crying. Richard Thornton finally stood up. His face had gone from pale to red, and he was pulling out his wallet with shaking hands. He threw a handful of $100 bills on the table, not counting them, not looking at anyone. "Richard," his girlfriend said, but he was already walking toward the door. "Mr. Thornton," Miriam Goldstein called out, her voice sharp. "You owe $20,000 to the Alzheimer's Research Foundation. Or was your word as worthless as your character?" He stopped, but didn't turn around. The entire restaurant was watching. The live stream was still rolling, now with over 1 million viewers. Everyone was waiting to see what the billionaire would do. Thornton pulled out his phone and made a transfer right there, his back still to everyone. Then he walked out without saying a word. But the damage to his reputation had already begun. The video was everywhere. His name was trending, but not in the way he'd always wanted. "Billionaire humiliates hidden genius" was the headline already appearing on news sites. His girlfriend didn't follow him. Instead, she walked over to Elena and handed her a business card. "I'm a partner at Steinberg Entertainment," she said quietly. "When you're ready, call me. The world needs to hear you play." Elena took the card numbly, still trying to process everything that had happened. The phone on the piano was still connected to the care facility. She could hear Angela talking excitedly in the background. "Elena," Angela's voice came through clearly. "Your mother is still smiling. She's humming. She hasn't hummed in 6 months. I think she's humming the melody you just played." Fresh tears spilled down Elena's cheeks. Music had always been their language, and somehow through the fog of disease her mother had heard and understood. Philippe approached nervously. "Elena, I had no idea. I'm so sorry for what happened tonight. Please don't quit. Please." But Elena wasn't thinking about quitting or staying. She was thinking about the 2 years she'd spent hiding, the 2 years she'd denied herself the one thing that made her feel whole. She'd thought she was protecting herself from pain, but the pain had been there anyway, just buried under exhaustion and endless work. Miriam was on her phone, speaking rapidly to someone. When she hung up, she turned to Elena with a smile that made her look decades younger. "That was my friend at Juilliard," she said. "They never filled your scholarship spot, Elena. They've been hoping you'd come back. After what I just sent them, the video of your performance, they want to offer you something even better. Full scholarship plus a living stipend for you and care assistance for your mother." Elena's legs nearly gave out. "What? But I can't. My mother needs..." "They have a partnership with a memory care facility right near campus," Miriam continued. "Top-rated, specializing in music therapy for Alzheimer's patients. Your mother would receive better care than she's getting now, and you could see her every day." The restaurant had gone quiet again, everyone listening to this conversation. The livestream viewers were commenting frantically, donations pouring into various Alzheimer's charities inspired by what they'd witnessed. Elena's phone rang. It was her mother's doctor, Dr. Patricia Reyes, who must have seen the video that was now everywhere. "Elena," the doctor said, her voice excited, "I just watched what happened. I've been researching music therapy for Alzheimer's patients. What you did tonight? Connecting with your mother through that music? It's exactly what we've been hoping to understand better. Would you consider working with our research team? Your mother's response was remarkable. Everything was happening. Too fast. 2 hours ago, Elena had been just another waitress being humiliated by a cruel customer. Now opportunities were appearing faster than she could process them. I need to see her, Elena said suddenly. I need to see my mother. Go, Felipa said immediately. Take all the time you need. Your job will be here if you want it, but somehow I don't think you'll need it anymore. Miriam handed Elena an envelope. The 20,000 from Thornton plus my matching donation. It's yours, not the charity's. You've earned it tonight. Consider it the first payment for the performance of a lifetime. Elena tried to refuse, but Miriam pressed the envelope into her hands. Your mother gave the world beautiful music for decades. Let the world give something back. As Elena gathered her things, the other diners began approaching her, pressing bills into her hands, thanking her for the music, sharing their own stories of family members with Alzheimer's. By the time she left, she had enough money to cover her mother's care for the next 6 months. The ride to the care facility felt like a dream. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The video had gone beyond viral. It was becoming a phenomenon. News stations wanted interviews. Record labels were reaching out. Famous pianists were sharing the video with comments like, "This is why music matters," and "I've never seen anything like this." When Elena arrived at the care facility, Angela met her at the door. "She's in the music room," Angela said, tears in her eyes. "After your call, we brought her there." She pointed at the piano and said, "Elena plays." Elena found her mother sitting in a chair by the old upright piano, the one Elena had refused to touch for 2 years. Maria Vasquez looked up when her daughter entered, and for just a moment, there was recognition in her eyes. "Mija?" her mother whispered, using the pet name she hadn't said in so long. Elena knelt beside her mother's chair, taking her frail hands. "Yes, Mama, it's me. You played our song." "I did, Mama. I played it for you." Her mother smiled, that beautiful smile that had once lit up concert halls around the world. "Play it again?" Elena sat at the old upright piano, the keys yellow with age, several of them chipped. It was nothing like the Steinway at the restaurant, but it didn't matter. She began to play Letters to My Daughter again, softer this time, gentler, just for her mother. Other residents began to gather, drawn by the music. Some of them had dementia too, but they stood quietly, swaying slightly, lost in the beauty of the sound. Music reached places in the brain that words couldn't touch, the doctors had said. Elena was watching it happen in real time. As she played, Elena made a decision. Yes, she would go back to Juilliard. Yes, she would perform again, but she would also work with the research team, helping them understand how music could reach through the fog of memory loss. She would use her gift not just to make beautiful sounds, but to help other families find moments of connection like this one. The video of her restaurant performance would eventually be viewed over 50 million times. Richard Thornton's company would lose major contracts as partners distanced themselves from him. He would quietly donate millions to Alzheimer's research over the coming years, though he'd never publicly acknowledge what happened that night. But none of that mattered right now. What mattered was this moment. Elena playing piano while her mother hummed along, two souls connected by music despite the disease trying to separate them. A week later, Elena would return to Le Bernardin to collect her things. The piano would have a small plaque installed beside it. On this piano, Elena Vasquez reminded the world that music is more than entertainment. It's memory, it's love, it's the part of us that no disease can steal. And every night before bed, no matter how advanced her mother's condition became, Elena would call the care facility and play piano over the phone. Sometimes her mother would respond, sometimes she wouldn't. But the music always traveled between them, a bridge built of notes and memories unbreakable even by forgetting. The waitress who had been forced to play had become the pianist who chose to heal. And in the end, that made all the difference.